Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I've been meaning to make a video about the pandemic for a while now, and I know that nowadays everyone is an armchair virus expert, but I still thought I'd pitch in with my own ideas. Jokes aside, I've been interested in sharing some of my concerns now. Now that everyone at least is optimistic that the vaccines will end the pandemic this year or the next. And I have been compiling a lot of virus information throughout the last year. Most of it is a bit outdated now, but still there are things that interest me that I would like to share. But first things first is a disclaimer. I will be talking about certain topics that might be downright depressing in their ramifications. So if you are someone that is easily upset or depressed, you should turn away now. I also would like to mention that the following material has been compiled by me throughout the last year. It is overwhelmingly academic or news report data, and it has a varying degree of quality. So what I'm trying to say is that I am not stating that I know what the future will be like, only that I have some major concerns and that I, through the making of this video, would like someone else to discuss in the comments or as a video response to see if my concerns are valid or if I'm just too pessimistic, or maybe to confirm that I may be right in some of the things. So let me just see here. I have a strange setup to help me make this video, but basically we can begin with this image I have here, which is trying to summarize all of the theories and speculations surrounding the pandemic into 2 axes and 4 main quadrants. And you yourself, the viewer, are probably somewhat situated in this area, which I would call the mainstream zone. I didn't make this chart, but I found it very interesting to share. It sums up a lot of things for me. Anyway, this mainstream area, as you can see, basically believes that the vaccine will save us from this pandemic, and that the problem really was that the Chinese really like to eat weird food. Thus, we had that zoonotic spillover from bats or pangolins from Wuhan, China. But basically that there's almost no youth mortality, there's only a small elderly or risk group mortality, and that vaccines will bring business as usual back. And my idea with showing you this image first is that you may find yourself here. Right now, I would say I am probably somewhere here, and hopefully through this video I will be able to explain to you why maybe it makes more sense for you to move more to this area, at least, intellectually speaking. That is to say that I believe there are enough concerns that you should be more in this area, and maybe, while we individuals might not be able to make a lot of impact knowing these things, perhaps it can help us plan somewhat or accept the future as it may come. But let's first just go a bit more deeply into this image. So as you can see, there is the main y-axis, where you have that on the top, the virus may have been intentional in its biological origin. That is to say, as a worst case, this was some sort of bioweapon created by the Chinese Communist Party. In the bottom part, you would see that as the worst case, this would be some sort of intentional manufactured origin, the whole concept of the pandemic. This is where you hear people talk about that this is all a globalist conspiracy to reset society somehow. And on the x-axis here, then you're more into how we actually solve the pandemic. So on the on the right side, you see that this would mean the pandemic has a high danger level, and it's less solvable by us. And as an example of a very extreme concept, it would be to believe that this virus can have something called antibody-dependent enhancement, or ADE. This means that the virus can use the antibodies of your body and basically hijack them and make them work for the virus rather than to help protect your body. And that, coupled with the mutations, would lead eventually to some sort of extinction level event. So you can see this sounds a bit far out, but yeah, all of these, I should say actually that all of the options here kind of logically make sense. The problem is that you have to accept the prior assumptions. And if those assumptions are wrong, you can end up in very strange sounding places like this one, or believing that there's a globalist conspiracy, or that this is a bioweapon released by China. And in this x-axis, on the other hand, you see that actually this would mean that there is a low danger level. The virus is harmless. Thus, it would mean it's more solvable. So basically, this would mean that, yeah, everybody is just a paid actor somehow, and that there are no excess deaths. So it's just a flu or a cold or something very harmless. So, beginning now, trying to explain some of my concerns. Let me just adjust something here. So, I guess, yeah, one of the big things that interested me in the beginning was the origin of the virus. And all of the pandemics in the past have had a natural cause, of course, because we did not have the technology to manufacture things in that sense. Only very recently, I would say in the last century or so, did we have that capacity. And personally, from the evidence that I have seen, I think it is likely that this virus was made in the lab, specifically in the lab in Wuhan. I also believe from the evidence that I have seen that this virus was made in the lab for some sort of benevolent purpose. This is what is meant here with the GOF, or gain of function. So in virology, there's this field called gain of function, where scientists try to take an existing virus and increase its infectability to better study how it can harm us humans or how it can spread. And the idea behind this is that eventually, with this research, we would be able to become better prepared for a future pandemic, ironically enough. But why? I mean, this is not a mainstream opinion by any chance. You might have heard some people talk about that it came from a lab. But as you can see here already, came from a lab can mean different things. It can mean that the virus was natural and they just had it in the lab and then they leaked out, that it was made in the lab by some benign purpose and then it leaked out, that it was a weapon made in the lab and then it leaked out, or that it was a weapon made in the lab and then it was intentionally released. So you have that spectrum of things. And I believe, from what I have seen, and I will show you soon, that this is an accidental lab leak from this gain of function research. That is to say, someone in that lab in China, in Wuhan, was experimenting with increasing the infectability of coronaviruses to better study them and to hopefully have something of value to show to help us fight against a future pandemic. And then it accidentally leaked out of that lab. And thus we have the pandemic that we have today. So why do I believe this? So I'm going to show you, I have many resources. There's many resources pointing to this. But I think the one that summarizes it all, and the one I have not really seen a good debunking of, but I might, after posting this video, someone might link me to it, is this anonymous paper that was published first in April 16 of last year. And here, it's a group of anonymous people that go through mostly, I would say pretty much or almost exclusively academic data. And it's fairly, you can see here the different, chapters. It's fairly encompassing, goes into extreme detail in many things. And if we go here to the conclusion, you can see here that at some point, from all the data that they have looked at, and you can also look at this yourself, the website you can see here is this project-evidence.github.io. Their conclusion is that at some point in late 2019, many people who visited the Huanan seafood market fell ill due to a new disease. To date, the origin of this disease is still unknown. But however, this market is less than 9 miles away from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which, and then they list a lot of coincidences, like extreme coincidences, that exactly point to the fact that this lab had worked with coronaviruses, they were doing this gain of function, and they have had leaks before, many leaks before, accidental leaks for sure. I mean, nobody's perfect, and yeah. This compilation of data is by no means trying to attack the Chinese people, and I'm not trying to attack them as well. It's clear that dealing with such a technology such as this, it's very easy to have leaks. And this would apply both for Americans or for, Chinese, Europeans, Africans, whoever it is that would be dealing with this. So if you're curious about this origin and why I believe and why I think it is, I mean, you can never really know for sure unless it was admitted or unless we found some sort of smoking gun proof that it came naturally. But I think this website and all of the data that was compiled here really proves that there is a very high likelihood that it did come from a lab. And anecdotally speaking, I've been noticing more and more the media picking that up for whatever it's worth. So yeah, check the website out if you're curious. Just gonna clear this up so you can see clearly. It's project-evidence.github.io, but there are other resources that talk to this. Now, before I move on, let me just, sorry about this. So now that let's say, I mean, you don't exactly believe me, but you're gonna give me the benefit of the doubt. So you might ask, why is this important? Where it came from? Well, I would say it's important because we should have accountability, right? We should, if it came from the natural environment, from the wet market, for example, we would hold those wet markets accountable and try to enforce stricter safety measures. By the same logic, if it came from a lab, we would try to push labs worldwide to be more careful with their safety levels. This means changing maybe lab routines, or maybe even banning this gain of function research because it might be too dangerous for the risk involved, for example, or maybe just having higher scrutiny on that field of research, for example. So that's the angle where I'm coming from. Incidentally, if it indeed came from the lab, and this was a man-made virus in some way, it also means that the way it spreads through the population might not be the same as a natural virus that we have come accustomed to expect, where you have usually 3 waves, and within 1 or 2 years it's over. If this indeed is a virus that is made from gain of function and it leaked from a lab, this would make the first gain of function pandemic, really, that we're facing. So a virus that had been designed to infect so much would make it it would mean that we would have to deal with it in a very different way. For example, it might infect other species, not just humans, much more easily, which means even if we eradicate it from the human population, it could emerge from different animal populations. similar to how we get the avian flu or the swine flu from this flu virus every year or so, because it still persists in those, not only in our farming of those animals, but also in their wild counterparts that then might infect the farmed ones. Yeah, so that's that. I would say this is, let's go back here. This would cover this hypothesis that it came from the lab leak. So you could see why I would not be so much in this mainstream zone, that I may not believe so much that it just naturally occurred, that it actually might be a lab leak. Okay, that's all fine and dandy. So now let's try to discuss a bit more why I'm more into the high danger level than a mainstream. In other words, why I think that despite the fact that we are now rolling out the first vaccines, we might not be able to get rid of all of this virus stuff this year or the next even. And this is where I will introduce a document that I've been working on since last year, which is just every time I find some interesting piece of information, I have been sharing it on my Twitter, but here it's a bit more organized. So you can see on the left the different categories I've tried to come up with. So for example, if I see a piece of news or an academic paper that relates to asymptomatic spread, I might add it on the asymptomatic spread chapter or title. And then you can see, then you can click on it and find out that document. Or if it's related to, I don't know, how long this pandemic might last, I might find some interesting news article with someone's opinion, and then I add it here. So you have a lot of information here that you can look at, and this information that I've compiled will support some of the concerns that I have, that I will voice to you. Let me just adjust this here again. So, why this pandemic might not quickly disappear? As I've already mentioned before, if the virus escaped from the lab and it was made from gain-of-function research, it is a virus that has been designed to infect much more human cells and maybe other cells than usual. This would also mean that it would infect other organisms after a few mutations. And unfortunately, we have observed that many different species have been infected with this SARS-CoV-2 virus. So in this document, I have a chapter called Other Animals Infected, where I've compiled information that I found. I mean, not all of it is here. But for example, we know that dogs and cats can catch this, have symptoms, and spread this disease. Same goes for tigers and lions. We even have cases of cats being reinfected with the virus. We also have seen mice, and mice pose a different concern altogether, because usually a virus does not easily infect both mice and humans. You might think about like the bubonic plague or the rats that were spreading it, but the rats were not really infected with the virus. They were merely carrying it on their surface, on their fur, or because they were going around human excretions and things like that. We have also seen gorillas that have been affected by this, and there's also other work with other types of apes. Fruit flies, we also know, and that's an insect, so it's a very different cell type, you could say. And then lastly, minks, specifically with the cases and the mutation that was happening in Denmark last year. So, if a virus can spread to all these different organisms, even if we somehow eradicated it from all of the human population, what are we going to do with all of these other animals? We can't easily vaccinate them, because not all of these animals are in cages or domesticated. How would we even go about vaccinating or somehow preventing the spread of a virus that is now that might be so deeply spread across the natural world as well. That is one of my big concerns, that there now exists a very big reservoir of SARS-CoV-2 in many different species, which means it can continue to mutate. It faces different selection pressures than the ones that we might try to force upon the virus. So even if we somehow cured ourselves, there is a likelihood that we will always have this virus looming over us, because it might emerge from one of these organisms here listed. So we have a harder time catching up and protecting ourselves from the virus, because now it has spread so far and wide across the animal kingdom. So that is one of my big concerns. Again, maybe it's not really a big concern. Maybe we don't really have that much data yet. But again, a lack of evidence is not evidence of something that is lacking necessarily. And yeah, this is a concern I have, that we now have this much mutation potential on top of the existing mutation potential that we have seen just from human infection. But okay, this is just one part of my concerns. Let's move on now to a bit of the vaccines. And there is a lot of controversy about vaccines, and also there's a lot of optimism about vaccines. Personally, I understand why we are vaccinating so early and so aggressively, especially from the point of view of governments. If vaccines can at the very least, reduce the severity of symptoms and also prevent people from having to go to the hospital so much, governments have an incentive, therefore, to vaccinate, because that means they can try to get things back to normal somehow. They think they can therefore contain this a bit better, and then we can learn to live with this, even if one vaccine is not enough and we have to repeat that. Yeah, eventually that would mean that we could learn to live with the virus a bit better. However, and I'm not going to go into the topic, for example, nowadays it's a bit it's talked a lot in the media, for example, that there's this risk of blood clots from the AstraZeneca, or that these vaccines are too experimental. I'm not going to really focus on that. My concern mostly is that from what we have seen so far in the data, and some of these links cover that, I don't know exactly which ones, but you can have a look here. And we also know that from other vaccines, from other viruses or bacteria, there is a risk that our technology in developing vaccines is not fast enough to catch up to a virus. And my biggest concern here is that so far from what we've seen, the vaccines that have been developed, they are not fully sterilizing. This means that as opposed to some other diseases, I don't know, polio, for example, if you have the vaccine and a virus or a bacteria enters you, and this vaccine has granted you full immunity, and therefore you fight it, you no longer shed. There is not even a risk of shedding the agent, where it is a bacteria or a virus, back to the world. So once it enters your body, it's like a black hole. It stops and it stays there. And you kind of suck out. You act as a vacuum cleaner for the whole population. This is why we can get that effect of herd immunity that you might have heard about. But if we are using non-sterilizing vaccines, this means that you are vaccinated, the virus may enter your body, you might not suffer, either you suffer small symptoms or no symptoms at all, but the virus, you may still spread the virus somehow. That is not good. especially when we are all still dealing with an active infection. Because what you have to think about is other vaccines, we usually vaccinate before the infection is spreading among society, or we are vaccinating because we want to prevent that spread in the first place. But if we are vaccinating with vaccines that not fully sterilize the virus, and there is this active infection happening in society where there's millions of active cases going around, you are creating a selective pressure for the virus to evade your vaccine. This means that the virus, when it encounters the antibodies you produced from the vaccine, because it's not completely sterilizing the virus, eventually some viruses will evolve to avoid those vaccines. On top of that, you have that because there is such a high active infection going on in society, many active cases, while we're trying to vaccinate, that's a lot of mutations happening in each person's body that can create a mutation on the virus that will avoid the vaccines. So we are kind of building or maybe accidentally creating a perfect storm where we are actively creating the conditions that will enable a virus to avoid the vaccines we have now. Which means eventually the virus will escape our immune system and create or have a more infectious form or a more lethal form. And this also means that, when we think about this scenario that is, in my opinion, being built up inadvertently, can we really, as a civilization, as a society, as the human world, research in a pharmaceutical way and then deploy? That is, every time we see a new mutant, a mutant virus, we can somehow create a vaccine fast enough and then deploy it, that we would break this tendency for the virus to become ever so more deadly or ever so more infectious. That is a question for me, because right now you might have seen that the vaccination is happening, but it's not going extremely smoothly. But this could just be that we are learning how to do it at such a big scale and such a fast scale, and maybe once we iron the kinks out, maybe it becomes much easier. We don't know. But it could be that is not the case. That is, that eventually there's just going to be so many mutations happening that we're not going to be able to keep up with this. So what I'm trying to say is that, therefore, our current vaccination efforts, while they may reduce this short-term mortality and hospitalization rates, which is why governments want to vaccinate, they might be contributing for higher long-term chronic effects or hospitalizations and mortality. So only when we would come up with this ideal fully sterilizing vaccine, which we don't know is possible for coronaviruses. There has been a lot of research in the past decades trying to do this for coronaviruses and rhinoviruses, basically the common cold viruses. But we don't know that we can do it. So only when we would have these fully sterilizing vaccines and we would reduce the active infections that are happening in society through these NPIs or non-pharmaceutical interventions, which would also require massive testing, contact tracing, and of course social distancing, lockdowns, things like that. Only with all those things together, I think we could stop the virus from evolving and mutating so much that we could finally stop the infection at a global scale. And I mentioned mutations, and as you may have seen also from the media, there's a lot of mutations right now. I also have a chapter here where I've compiled things from the early UK strain that has now become pervasive. And then there's many interesting strains that have been appearing. I can mention a few, for example. One of them is a French one that actually seems to not be detected so easily by our current PCR testing. So you have that added complexity that we might have to upgrade testing. And will there ever become a time when we cannot upgrade fast enough? We don't know. Because we know that the virus can spread from people without symptoms. And if we cannot detect that people without symptoms have the virus, we have very little chance of controlling this in any way. The Finnish variant that was reported last year also seemed to appear to avoid some of these testing methods that we have, but didn't seem to me as urgent as this French one. Then you have these called partial escape mutants, or just escape mutants. This means that they are escaping either the immune response we have created from a previous infection or the immune response from a vaccine. So those are things also to take into account. And if you take a look at all of this list, there is many different mutations from different countries. And so far, the mutation, all of these have been mostly driven by human infection. But in the case of the Danish mutation that it was driven by minks, here we see one of these concerns that I was talking about with the animal reservoirs. So how can we really control a pandemic so that we no longer have to do all of this sitting at home, social distancing, not socializing that we don't want to do? How can we ever go back to what it was before in 2019 if we have all of these things happening at the same time? That is my big concern. Okay, and regarding going a bit now into this testing issues, so it is possible that these new variants that appear that we cannot detect, that it's just a matter of time until we develop a better test. But we have also to consider the possibility that we may not be able to create a test that is as cheap to manufacture, as cheap and quick to deploy, and as convenient as the current tests are to test so much people with. So I don't know if you know that in China, for example, they have switched from nose and throat swabbing to anal swabbing. And I have not read much about their decision to do this, but it may be that either just this virus in general, or that a mutation has appeared that means, or just the way that infects us, it might mean that our current testing in the West on the nose and the mouth may not be so effective, but as the virus is caught by our body and expelled through the digestive tract, once it reaches the anus, it might be that is a good way to more reliably detect it. Now, I don't know about you, but the prospect of anal swabbing is something that I think many people, myself included, are not looking forward to and will actively reject that. So here we see another stressor to the whole situation, which is if the only reliable way to test is a way that most people will reject, how can we control the pandemic? I don't see a clear way. I mean, I can imagine that even following the principle that the virus is more prevalent to detect in our digestive tract, there may be a way, for example, that we developed, I don't know, a toilet where after you do your number 1 or number 2, there would exist some device there that could detect if you have an infection. That would be much less invasive than an anal swab. That means it could be much more easily accepted by the population. However, could we make such a thing with the dilution factor that goes with using a toilet, and also cheaply enough that you could put it in all the toilets in the world or in places that don't even have toilets? That is a concern and a question that I have also. Yeah, and if we are seeing, in fact, mutations that avoid these tests, it could be that we could see false confidence. For example, we could see in countries that cases are going down because we are not detecting those viruses in the normal tests, when in fact it's a new mutation that is spreading that would be that can avoid these tests, and we would know until it would be a bit too late, and we would start seeing the people rush to the hospitals or things like that. And also, if we are stuck in some sort of perpetual competition with the virus, where we have to keep developing more intricate and complex tests to be able to just to detect it, eventually we're gonna find ourselves in some sort of diminishing return scenario where it becomes too expensive or too complex to create the next testing kit that would allow us to detect the virus. And then we would lose one of a crucial tool in fighting a pandemic, which is to know where the virus is when we cannot rely solely on symptoms, as is the case with this virus. All right, so that is another big concern I have. Hopefully I was able to express that somewhat. And I would say the final one that I have has to do with the nature of the sickness that is COVID-19. So SARS-CoV-2, as you know, is the virus, but COVID-19 is the disease. And we are still in the early stages of understanding what exactly it's doing to us. Because our perception from what we see as the symptoms, it's that it's a respiratory disease. In fact, that's why the virus has the name it has, SARS-CoV-2. That means it's related to SARS. SARS was the first virus, and SARS means, I think it's syndrome of acute or severe acute respiratory syndrome. So we believe it's mostly an infection that happens at the level of the lungs, the throat, the nose. But from the data that I have been observing, from the data I have been compiling, from the several papers, news articles, it seems that this virus is much more prevalent than just a respiratory disease. So what do I mean by that? In one of these chapters, I'm just taking a while here to see, you can see here is this one, for example. You might have heard about the COVID long haulers. These are people that either after having dealt with an infection, continue having symptoms for days, weeks, months. Some people are in a permanent state of illness. Or some people have the infection, then they have a recovery period where they seem that they are healthy, they don't feel anything, but then you get some chronic diseases that appear later on. So here I have a compilation of this new data that we are learning about, which is basically that some people, we don't know yet how many, but a lot of them become chronically ill with lifelong symptoms, even if they are still only respiratory symptoms for life. And we still don't really understand why is that happening. Is it because the virus is good at avoiding any treatment or any immune response? Is it because the virus is affecting the brain and therefore it's hijacking our own ability to fight it somehow? I think that the evidence is starting to appear that this virus attacks the brain very efficiently. And this is a big concern. Not only because we have these maybe respiratory long-term effects, which could last for the rest of our lives even. I mean, that would suck that you get one infection and you are stuck with that for the rest of your life. But again, it could be many things. In trying to find out the answer to this, I've come across several hypotheses. One of the main hypotheses about this, other than it's just a respiratory symptom, is that we are dealing with a virus that sort of resembles AIDS. in the way that it attacks our own immune system. And you can see here that I've compiled information about how it attacks our own immune system. There is also a document here which is it's not as high quality as the one that I showed you about the lab origin, but it still does some compilation of data that shows how a lot of the symptoms being reported for this COVID-19 are very similar to AIDS patients in many ways. So you can check that out. It's this one. I'm curious to hear. I mean, personally, I still don't believe this because there's some things that don't really fit. I don't think maybe we're necessarily dealing with an airborne AIDS sort of thing, something that is like AIDS. It affects us a bit like AIDS, and it can be spread by the air. As you can see here, I've also compiled things that could indicate this ADE or antibody-dependent enhancement, because I consider ADE to be something somewhat scary. So if we see that this is happening, that the virus finally can use our own body against us, we have no defense. I mean, no matter what even if we have a vaccine, if the virus can just use the immunity we produced to propagate itself and attack us, there's no point in, there's nothing we can do about it. But from what I've seen so far, that is not the case. But I am keeping an eye on it because of how big the impact would be if we find out that this virus can use our own immune system in that way. But yeah, we have immune effects being reported. We have how the COVID affects HIV patients differently. So there's a compilation here regarding this hypothesis that maybe we're dealing with something that is very immune tuned. It's very tuned to our immune response. But like I said, I don't think that is necessarily the case so far. However, what I do think could have more explanatory power, it's the fact that the virus seems to be very tuned to affect our brain. And the most scary part of this would be this concept of prions or prions. Again, I still don't think we have enough data to conclude that we are dealing with something that is similar to a prion. And I myself don't quite understand the concept of prions so well. As far as I know, these are proteins that are extremely infectious. So they're not really alive, they're proteins, but they still infect everything they come in contact with, to the point where if someone in a medical setting has to use a tool to touch a prion, they must very heavily sterilize or altogether destroy the tools they use to touch this prion because of how infectious it is. So there is maybe some indication that it could be like that, but I still don't think we're dealing with that. However, that doesn't mean we are not dealing with something extremely difficult, which is if it gets into our brain and somehow it's causing all sorts of issues. Just look at some of these links. There is a lot of cognitive deficits that people experience months after their initial infection, which might have been only mild or even asymptomatic. Headaches, delirium. Some people report hallucinations. Because the brain controls everything of our body. If we get something in our brain, it can cause all sorts of issues in our body that we don't know about. So I think this might be the hypothesis with the most explanation, that this virus actually, even if it didn't come from a lab, it seems that this virus is very tuned to entering our brain somehow. So in that sense, we should somehow tackle the pandemic in a different way than if it's just a respiratory disease, right? Then we would really have to watch all our orifices, which include the mouth, the nose, and the eyes, We might need to upgrade our masks to really prevent this from entering. We might have to shift focus from treating respiratory symptoms to actively develop something that goes into the brain and helps fight the virus without affecting any of our major functions that the brain is responsible for. But yeah, these I would say are the big hypothesis that I would have, and therefore you have now heard most of my main concerns for this. So when I think about all of these concerns now, and how it seems to me that these vaccines might help things in the short term, if they help at all, but at the sacrifice of the long term, then you can see how I could reach the conclusion that this pandemic will not end this year or next year even. Because I don't see yet how we have the tools to fight this pandemic, knowing what we know about the virus and what it can do so far. So here in the longevity of the pandemic, I have found some articles that talk about how this could be 2 to 4 years, then 5 years, now 7 years. I think that the way to end this would be if we can develop a fully sterilizing vaccine, and if we deploy that vaccine at the same time that we have very reduced active infections. So, for example, an ideal scenario would be that in a country like Australia or New Zealand or even China or maybe Iceland, some of these either these countries that have been very aggressive from the start to fight to prevent there being an active spread or community spreading of the virus in their society, couple that with a breakthrough in the vaccine which would allow us to have a fully sterilizing vaccine, then we could do that. But it's difficult to shift a pandemic when we have such a high level of spread, especially in the West. And every time the numbers reduce, the restrictions are eased because people cannot stand to be locked for so long, of course. And I also have, if you're interested, document at least 2 here about how lockdowns have an impact, not only economic, but they have an impact in people's health. People, when they're isolated so much, they suffer. They decline cognitively. They are no longer as intelligent or as efficient in performing tasks. So taking all of this together, you can see why I may sound a bit negative or pessimistic when I say that I don't think we will be going back to how the world was in 2019 anytime soon. There are several key things that need to happen, either if that's only new data that appears that changes our perception or something that actually is developed, like a new vaccine. Only when these things are in motion, I believe we could finally turn around. And until then, there's not really much you can do with this information other than reinforce maybe a belief that you should try to avoid getting this virus if you can. Not only because you might be putting at risk your own health or the health of people you love, but also because by getting infected, you are one more step in this wheel of mutations. So you are actively allowing the virus to eventually be able to escape whatever we throw at it, and thus prolong the situation we find ourselves in. So finally, going back here to our initial graph, I believe that this is the scenario we are facing, that we are dealing with a virus that was made maybe benevolently, but accidentally leaked from a lab. This virus was made to infect more. This would explain how it can spread so easily, affect so many different species, resist some of our own immune responses, reinfect people. And at the same time, perhaps we might not be dealing with a virus that is very deadly on the get-go, but we are dealing with something that leaves long-lasting effects in our health, and at the same time has the risk of collapsing healthcare systems in the present term. So, with that said, there is not much more I can say, actually. I hope that if you do check the COVID resources list I have, that you find something interesting. I hope that if you don't agree with anything I said, please comment or reach out to me in some way. Show me the data that you have looked at. Show me something that I've said that is obviously wrong, so I can add it here to the list, so I can incorporate it into the model that I'm making in my head of what the situation looks like, so other people can also hear. And if you have found also information that confirms something I've said, also share it. I mean, we are still, even though it might seem from all these resources I have and all the others I have not added that we know a lot, we still know very little. And only by knowing what we are really dealing with can we really have a chance at actually stopping it and going back to a better life that we used to have. So this has been a long video. I hope it made sense somewhat. Again, feel free to comment if you didn't understand something I said, or if you don't agree with something, or if you do agree, or if you want to expand on a point I made. If you are one of these people that are perhaps in this quadrant, I mean, I'm sure this video will not have made much sense to you, because for you it's all it's all some sort of government control angle, or that we're just dealing with a flu that is not really harmful. So I don't think you need to bother, if you're still watching this, to comment if you're in one of these quadrants. But for those of you that are more in the mainstream zone, or already might be in one of these areas, feel free to reach out. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.